The year is 1804. On a blazing summer evening at Castle Hill, a government farm and convict settlement, the air hung heavy with the promise of change. Philip Cunningham, an Irish stonemason, a man hardened by years of penal servitude, was about to ignite a spark. He set his hut on fire, a prearranged signal, a beacon in the night, calling for rebellion against their oppressors. Upon seeing the flames, convicts dropped their tools, the symbols of their forced labor clattering to the ground. They surged from their cramped and squalid huts, a wave of pent-up anger and frustration unleashed, grabbing whatever they could find as weapons, shovels, axes, hammers, anything to fight for their freedom. Their faces were lit by the flickering firelight, a mixture of hope for a better future and the desperation born of years of suffering. The plan, audacious and fraught with peril, was to gather as many men as possible, seize control of Parramatta, then march on Sydney itself and capture ships in the harbour to escape the colony. Maybe even, against all odds, return to Ireland, their homeland. Cunningham, a natural leader, led with a booming voice filled with conviction. He rallied the men to Vinegar Hill, a name deliberately chosen, echoing the site of a bloody Irish rebellion and symbolising their own fight for freedom. Alarms rang out in Parramatta, shattering the evening calm. Redcoats scrambled to their posts, confusion and fear spreading through their ranks. Governor King, upon hearing the news, quickly realised this was no ordinary escape attempt. It was a full-blown, organised rebellion against the Crown's authority. The Australian bush braced for a showdown as the convicts marched towards their uncertain destiny, a desperate army chasing the elusive dream of freedom. Philip Cunningham, a name whispered with reverence among the convicts. Once a leader in Ireland's bloody 1798 rebellion against British rule, a failed uprising that saw many patriots imprisoned and transported across the globe. He carried the weight of that defeat, and the burning desire for freedom still flickered within him. Now, transported to the harsh lands of Australia, he led the charge once more, his fire for freedom undimmed by distance or despair. He saw in this new land a new opportunity. William Johnston, his tough and fiercely loyal second-in-command, a man hardened by years of brutal treatment. He fought not just for the abstract ideal of Ireland, but for something far more immediate. A life free from the ever-present threat of the lash and the crushing weight of servitude. Most of the rebels were Irish political prisoners, men and women exiled for their beliefs and their defiance. But the ranks swelled with English and Scottish convicts, men and women who found common cause in their shared suffering. They were united by misery, yes, but also by a flickering ember of hope, the hope for a better life, a life of their own making. On the other side stood Major George Johnston, a disciplined and experienced British officer, tasked with maintaining order in this volatile colony. And Governor King, a man growing increasingly desperate to keep order and maintain control over a population simmering with discontent. For the authorities, this brewing rebellion was not just a local disturbance, it was a direct threat to the very foundation of the empire itself. For the rebels it was a last wild gamble, a desperate roll of the dice for liberty or a swift and brutal end. Two worlds, two vastly different dreams for the future of this land, about to collide in a violent clash that would shape the destiny of a nation. Why risk it all? What drove these men to such a desperate act of rebellion? What pushed them to the very edge of survival, where the only options were death or freedom? For the convicts, life in the penal colony was a relentless cycle of endless toil, constant hunger gnawing at their bellies, and brutal, dehumanizing punishment, a living death, a slow erosion of the soul. Every day was a struggle against despair. Most Irish rebels, transported for their part in uprisings back home, saw themselves as patriots and freedom fighters, not common criminals. They were constantly clinging to dreams of freedom, of returning home to their families and the green hills of Ireland. Whispers and rumours of French rescue, of ships on the horizon, and tantalizing news of war raging in Europe, with Napoleon challenging the British Empire, fueled their hope and ignited a spark of possibility. The timing of their planned uprising was no accident. It was a calculated risk. The rebels fervently believed this desperate gamble was their best shot at achieving liberation. With British soldiers stretched thin, guarding vast territories across the sprawling colony. Their defiant cry, "Death or liberty," wasn't just empty words shouted in anger. It was the stark, brutal choice they faced, the only two paths available to them. Fight, risk everything and maybe die free, or submit, surrender all hope, and live and die in chains, a forgotten soul. Sheer desperation, fueled by the faintest glimmer of hope, made them bold. At dawn on March 5, 1804, hundreds of rebels gathered at Vinegar Hill ready for battle. Major Johnston's redcoats, though outnumbered, were disciplined and well-armed, joined by local militia. Johnston tried negotiation first, riding out under a white flag to parley with Cunningham, but it was a ruse. Cunningham was seized and chaos erupted. The soldiers charged. The rebels, leaderless and shocked, broke almost instantly. The fight was over in minutes, a one-sided rout. The dream of liberty was crushed in the dust. The uprising ended as quickly as it began. Retribution was swift. Cunningham and other leaders were hanged, their bodies displayed as warnings. Dozens were flogged or sent to harsher penal settlements like Coal River. The government tightened its grip, but the uprising forced them to rethink how they treated political prisoners. Vinegar Hill became legend, the only large-scale convict revolt in Australian history. It was a story of courage and desperation, echoing through the years. The men didn't win their freedom, but their fight became part of Australia's journey from prison to nation. Their cry for liberty still lingers in the land.